For nearly a century, Europe trembled at the fury of the Northmen. We watched as the sons of Ragnar brought the kings of England to their knees, and their longships carved through waters from York all the way to the Mediterranean. But by the end of the 9th century, the golden age of endless raiding had begun to fade. The world had changed, and for those who refused to bow their heads to authority, only one path remained open: into the icy void. Floki Vilgerdarson was not hunting for gold, slaves, or silver. Instead of easy plunder, he hungered for freedom and land, commodities that, in a cramping Scandinavia, had become more precious than any treasure hoard. His ship sailed toward a place where there were no kings, and where death threatened not by the blade, but by the ferocious cold. History remembers him as a great explorer, a man who navigated the seas by following ravens. In reality, however, his expedition turned into a textbook example of colonization errors. While he proved himself a genius of navigation, Vilgerdarson turned out to be a catastrophically poor strategist on land. Today, we will reveal exactly why he took 3 ravens on board and how these birds replaced navigational instruments in the endless ocean. You will witness the fatal blunder committed by the settlers in their very first summer, seduced by a deceptive abundance. And you will understand why the man who discovered Iceland christened it with a cursed name and warned others against sailing to its shores. This is a story of how euphoria gives way to starvation, and how the dream of one's own kingdom shatters against a harsh winter that kills everything that draws breath. In the previous cycle, we witnessed the triumph of Ivar the Boneless and the odyssey of Bjorn Ironside. While they carved up England and ravaged the south, storm clouds were gathering in the north. Political oppression was pushing men off the edge of the map. The fate of this navigator proves one thing: kicking open the door to a new world is only half the battle. The real challenge is surviving what lies waiting behind the threshold. The world had changed. The era when the flotillas of Ragnar and his sons could sail with impunity into river mouths, seizing everything of value, was rapidly receding into the past. The kings of England and Francia had learned their cruel lessons. Waterways were now barred by fortified bridges that shattered the prows of longships. Cities were growing layers of stone walls. Raids that once promised easy loot had turned into bloody meat grinders with unpredictable outcomes. Europe was actively fortifying its coastal zones, transforming into an impregnable fortress. However, for men like Floki, the main blow did not come from the west, but from the rear. In Norway, the star of Harald Fairhair was rising. Instead of just another chieftain hungry for glory, an architect of a new reality had stepped into the arena. Previously, every jarl in his own fjord recognized only his own law. Now, Harald placed the people before a brutal choice: submit or perish. He demanded taxes, obedience, and absolute loyalty. Those who refused to bend the knee were met with burning homesteads and the swords of the royal warband. The situation was aggravated by a demographic trap. Scandinavia was suffocating from overpopulation. The rule of primogeniture acted inexorably. Lands and power passed exclusively to the eldest son. For the younger sons, only one refuge remained: the sea. Thousands of young, strong warriors found themselves strangers in their own land. The absence of a home, a foggy future, and the impossibility of choice pushed them to the brink. Many are accustomed to seeing Vikings merely as conquerors, but in the late 9th century, they transformed into political refugees. This story is not about a lust for gold, but a struggle for survival. When a wealthy Europe locked its gates, bristling with forests of spears, and their homeland turned into a prison under the rule of a despot, only one path opened up, the path into the gray, stormy unknown of the West, to the place where the maps ended, to the place from which, according to legends, no one returns. Almost no one. This expedition did not resemble a leap into a complete void. Floki Vilgerdarson was not walking to the edge of the world blindly. He was chasing ghosts. Several years before him, the ocean had already cast Scandinavians onto these shores. However, for them, it was a navigational error, not a destination. The first discoverer was Naddod, a Viking who simply wanted to reach the Faroe Islands. A storm knocked him off course and carried him to the rugged eastern coast of an unknown land. Naddod climbed the highest mountain, straining his eyes into the distance in search of smoke from hearths, a sure sign of people. But the expanse remained empty. As he departed, he saw thick snow falling on black rocks and gave the land a name full of cold and alienation: Snaeland, Snowland. Following him came the Swede Gardar Svavarsson. Unlike Naddod, he showed the persistence of a researcher. Gardar circumnavigated the land, proving that before him lay a massive island. The navigator even wintered there, building the first temporary house in a bay known today as Husavik, Bay of Houses. But even Gardar did not stay. The Scandinavian returned to the east, proudly naming the island after himself, Gardarsholmi, Gardar's Isle. These tales circulated through the mead halls of Norway. Most perceived them as standard tall tales about distant rocks, but to Floki they sounded like an invitation. He heard the most important thing: there waits a land that has no masters. It is important to realize the true madness of this plan. All previous Viking voyages were raids. A longship is a vessel designed exclusively for war, narrow, fast, packed with fighters who sleep right on the deck under animal skins. They did not need comfort, they valued only speed. Floki, however, was not planning a raid. He was preparing a full-scale migration. Imagine the logistical nightmare of this undertaking. Floki intended to take not only his wife and children. Onto the open decks of the longships, they loaded the foundation of future wealth: livestock. Sheep, cows, perhaps horses. Transporting livestock across the North Atlantic on an open vessel in the 9th century is a technical task bordering on fantasy. The beasts required fresh water, which was already in short supply for the crew. They required fodder. In a storm, they panic, breaking legs and shipboards. Every head of cattle on board turned into an anchor slowing their progress, and a ticking bomb in case of bad weather. But Floki committed to this risk. The voyage became a one-way ticket. The navigator sold or abandoned all his property in Norway, exchanging a stable past for a ghostly future. He packed the ships to the brim: tools, grain for sowing, household utensils, fishing gear. The moment of the greatest gamble arrived. Floki Vilgerdarson stood at the stern, watching the shores of Norway dissolve into the mist. He carried an entire world with him to root it in new soil. The navigator did not doubt. Experience, strength, and will would guarantee success. The Viking believed he was going to Gardar's Isle to become a king. But in reality, he was leading his family and his wealth straight into a trap that nature had been preparing for thousands of years. As soon as the Faroe Islands dissolved into the fog astern, the world for the crew narrowed to the boundaries of the longship. Landmarks vanished. East and west were erased. All that remained was a gray, endless circle of icy water, where the sky merged with the ocean into a single wall of lead. Floki sailed without a magnetic compass or complex astrolabes. In this void, a course error of just 1 degree meant not merely a delay, it promised a slow death from thirst in the middle of the Atlantic. But on board lurked a technology as ancient as humanity itself. On the deck, sheltered from the salty spray, stood a cage containing 3 ravens. No shamanism involved, only cold calculation. Birds soar higher than masts, peering over the horizon to where the human eye is powerless. Navigation by birds seemed a simple matter, but the ocean demanded a different, terrible price for its help. After several days of travel, Floki released the first raven. The bird soared into the sky, circled, and with a cry rushed back toward the stern. A cruel verdict. The land they had left was still closer than their goal. They were frozen in the middle of nowhere. Floki ordered them to row on. The North Atlantic does not forgive audacity without sacrifice. The sagas describe the journey that followed sparingly, but behind the dry lines lies a tragedy capable of breaking any father. Along with Floki, his family had embarked on this voyage. A storm in these latitudes does not attack with wind, but with a wall of water. An open longship turns into a splinter. Icy rollers crash over the side, licking away everything not lashed down tight. In this chaos, amidst the roar of the tempest and the cracking of wood, Floki lost what was most precious. His young daughter did not fall in battle and did not fade from sickness. The ocean took her instantly. 1 wave, and then nothing. The sagas are silent about funerals. The open sea knows no graves. The abyss swallowed the body. Floki, who was leading his kin to a new life, now stood on the slippery deck, staring into the black water that had taken his child. This was the toll for passage. From this moment, the expedition ceased to be merely a search for a home. It turned into an obsession. The way back was closed forever. To return to Norway would mean admitting that his daughter's death was in vain. He required this land. He needed a justification for this sacrifice. When the storm subsided, he released the second raven. The bird rose high, inspected the empty expanse, and returned to the ship in terror. There was no land. Despair seeped into the hearts of the crew. And only when Floki, his eyes filled with icy resolve, released the third bird, it did not circle. The raven confidently shot forward into the misty unknown of the west. Floki croaked, "Follow him." It was this moment of supreme despair and hope that gave him the name that entered eternity. Rafna Floki, Raven Floki. Soon, black, jagged cliffs rose on the horizon. These were not the soft shores of Europe. Before them stood a natural fortress. They entered the bay of Vatnsfjörður, the fjord of the lake. After weeks of terror, the scene that opened up seemed mockingly beautiful. The fjord was literally boiling with fish. Seals lazily basked on the rocks, knowing no fear. The cliffs turned white with bird colonies. The ship crunched into the shingle. Exhausted people and terrified livestock finally touched solid ground. Euphoria overwhelmed the settlers. It seemed the gods had rewarded them for their torment. The ravens had led them to untouched wealth. Floki saw abundance, but his mind, blinded by grief and joy of salvation, missed the most important thing. They had found paradise, but they failed to notice the snare. The sun shone, the grass was green, and the food supplies seemed endless. No one guessed that the local warmth was a lie, and this sense of false security would become their second and final death sentence. Iceland greeted them with deceitful warmth. The fjord of Vatnsfjörður seemed like the promised land. Nature here did not yet know man. Seals calmly allowed people to approach closely, and fatty salmon crowded the clear rivers. For the settlers who had survived storms and the death of a child, this land looked like a divine gift. Floki and his companions greedily set about gathering the fruits of the generous earth. The days turned into an endless feast. Men went out to sea at dawn and returned in boats that sat low in the water under the weight of the catch. The smoke of the smokehouses did not dissipate for a minute. Euphoria reigned in the camp. Everyone felt like the master of a newfound treasury. Floki believed he had found paradise. It seemed to him that the elements had finally submitted, offering an easy and well-fed life. But in reality, nature had set a trap. Intoxicated by abundance, the people committed an unforgivable mistake. Staring into the ocean depths, they forgot to look at the ground beneath their feet. In Norway, the rhythm of life is dictated by an eternal fear of the cold. There, summer is not a vacation, but a desperate race. The main task of the season is not fishing, but haymaking. To realize the scale of the disaster, one must recall the Viking economy. Livestock represented living capital, wool, milk, leather, and a universal currency. Any cow is a complex biological mechanism that transforms grass into life itself. But this mechanism requires fuel. In winter, when pastures disappear under snow, animals can only survive on harvested hay. Floki had brought a fortune with him. He had risked everything ferrying herds across the ocean. And now, while the people stuffed their bellies with fish, the Icelandic grass yellowed and rotted on the root. No one picked up a scythe. Summer in these latitudes is a treacherous liar. It is bright, but criminally short. The sun began to rapidly lose strength, and the nights became noticeably colder. The wind changed direction, bringing a scent from the north that an experienced sailor would confuse with nothing else: the scent of ice. One day, the fjord, that inexhaustible source of life, suddenly darkened. The birds flew away, and then the trap slammed shut. Floki stood at the threshold, watching the first snow cover the empty earth. Mountains of fish lay in reserve, but for the livestock, the foundation of his future kingdom, not a single blade of grass remained. He had won the battle with the ocean, but lost the war against time. And now he would have to watch his wealth die before his very eyes. Winter in Iceland does not sneak up. It crashes down with all its might. Snow swaddled the valley of Vatnsfjörður in a dense, suffocating shroud. The temperature plummeted, and the fjord, which had fed the people all summer, began to be encased in a crust of ice. However, the main blow of the elements was not struck against the humans. This time, the barns suffered. As soon as drifts buried the pastures, the livestock began to bellow from hunger. Sheep and cows, accustomed to human care, waited in vain for fodder. There was nothing to fill the troughs. Floki had committed a fatal rookie mistake. He had trusted in nature's mercy where cold pragmatism was required. In Norway, the loss of livestock would have brought a hard year. Here, at the edge of the world, it promised total ruin. The animals fell one by one and did not rise again. The great navigator, who had managed to guide long ships across the Atlantic, capitulated before the laws of biology. Floki stood in the stable and watched as his status, his wealth, and the very future of his clan perished. By the middle of winter, a deafening silence reigned in the pens. The entire herd had died. The expedition turned into a desperate struggle for survival. The people survived thanks to the fish and summer stocks, but the dream of a colony perished along with the last cow. Having lost the livestock, the Vikings lost the ability to produce wool, milk, and meat. Yesterday's pioneers turned into common shipwreck victims. But the most terrible thing awaited them ahead. When the daylight hours increased and the people began to prepare the ships for flight, the ocean delivered the final blow. Spring arrived, but it brought no warmth. Instead, the current clogged the fjord with massive blocks of drifting ice. The exit from the bay was locked. Floki and his people were caught in an icy prison. Left without livestock or resources, they sat on the shore and drilled the horizon with their eyes, waiting for nature to deign to release them. This waiting, saturated with rage and powerlessness, finally broke the spirit of the great Viking. Spring brought not warmth, but a bitter clarity. Climbing to a peak, the navigator fixed his gaze to the north. The fjord below was still shackled by ice. Currents had choked it with drifting Greenlandic blocks, turning the water into a lifeless white field. In that moment, trembling with rage, Floki named this land. It was a curse, a warning. Iceland. Iceland. The navigator wished for the name alone to scare off anyone who decided to repeat his journey. When the wind finally shifted, they escaped this ice coffin. Upon returning to Norway, Floki did not mince words. In the feasting halls, he impressed upon listeners that the land he discovered was a worthless wasteland. In his speeches, pictures of cold and death came alive. It seemed the story should end here, but this is where the saga's greatest paradox came into play. Members of his crew began to speak differently. Herjolf described the shores with restraint, but Thorolf, this man swore by the gods that the land was so rich that butter drips from every blade of grass. Why did their views diverge so starkly? Floki judged the land by his losses, looking at the world through the prism of shattered ambitions. His companion, however, saw the potential that the chieftain had missed due to hubris. History rendered its verdict. The name Iceland remained on the maps forever, but the legend of the butter won out. Those very colorful exaggerations of Thorolf about fabulous fertility. People, exhausted by the tyranny of Harald Fairhair, heard in them not a threat, but an invitation. Floki wanted to slam the door to this world shut, but instead he unwittingly pointed the way for those who would prove wiser and luckier than he. History loves a cruel irony. Floki Vilgerdarson entered the sagas as the man who cursed a new land. Having lost his daughter and his entire fortune there, in his fury he named the island Iceland, hoping to scare away strangers. Upon his return to Norway, the navigator convinced everyone this god-forsaken place is fit only for death. But the harsh land had sunken its claws into his heart deeper than his own anger. Years in Norway brought no peace. The native fjord seemed too cramped for one who had seen the boundless horizons of the north. Likely, with age, Floki realized the island was not bad. It was he himself who was unprepared for its trials. In the end, the Raven returned to Iceland and settled in the valley of Flókadalur. The land he once rejected became his only home and his final resting place. While the old Viking was reconciling with the past, another hero was already outfitting his longships, a man who decided not to argue with the island, but to accept its harsh rules. In the next episode, we will see the one who corrects the mistakes of the discoverer, Ingolf Arnarson. Unlike Floki, he will entrust his fate not to birds, but to the will of the gods. Upon approaching the shore, he will commit an insane act. He will cast the sacred pillars of his throne into the raging ocean and vow to build his hall wherever they wash up on land, even if the search takes years. In the next episode, the first blood of Reykjavik, the birth of a nation, and the beginning of true colonization. And now, the choice is yours. Imagine you are sitting in a mead hall, listening to Floki's tale of a frozen hell. Which would you believe? The bitter truth of the discoverer, or Thorolf's buttery dreams of a bountiful land? Would you risk your life for phantom freedom? Write your opinion in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss the landing of Ingolf. See you in the Smoky Bay.